You're listening to Adventure Party for the third week of May 2024. This week, what if finding money in a hole in the ground just gave you superpowers for some reason? The Adventuring Party, discussing tabletop and rated gaming the Irish way. Welcome to the party. I'm Shane.
And I'm Dave. And today, the classic concept, gold for XP.
An often forgotten and maligned element of early games was their tying of character progression to the amount of treasure you got. I think it's interesting in these years of the OSR revival. Now that people have actually had a chance to sit down, like think through like what was the actual plan here. The idea actually does seem to have an awful lot of merit. That does it like why it works this way and why people go back to it. I think is worth discussing. Although we will probably have to get to the issues like at the end, I think I'll have thoughts, but the ultimate fate of gold for XP in modern gaming. But should we start with positives, or do you have anything else to?
So perhaps a very brief primer what it is, because not everyone has been poking around it in those circles. So in the earliest editions of Dungeons and Dragons, there was the gold for XP was a concept, specifically gold for treasure retrieve. As some people have pointed out, there's been some ambiguity across the various editions, earlier editions, about when XP was given, whether you step foot outside the dungeon and any treasure you have on you, contributes to your XP, or is it when you get back to town? Is a few brave souls have said that's only after for treasure sold. I recall I recall some advice for a Viking setting in the Arcane magazine from back in the 90s, describing you only get gold for say XP for treasure you give away, because of the concept of gifting in Viking culture.
Yeah, well, we're starting off with one of the things is that often the process had a bit of ambiguity, ambiguity which early D&D probably didn't have because they didn't have what we would have in terms of fixed length sessions in the same way we have, or these 5 people can only get together on this night for this many hours, and therefore everything has to be done at the table. Whereas original games, like if you went into the dungeon, found a treasure, and left an hour in, you would then spend like half an hour doing the downtime for your for what you did. Then you either bring out another game or you start a new dungeon expedition. They didn't have the rigid scheduled idea that we might have, and they saw dungeon expeditions very differently.
Yeah, no, yeah, no, just a quite entirely different mindset from the sounds of it.
Yeah, and they didn't consider the process of hauling things back from the dungeon to be as important unless you were doing a hex roll. For them, once you got to the exit of the dungeon, session was over and you could start doing all the math. We're starting off at maybe one of the negative notes, but I don't think it's necessarily negative, but it does sort of reveal one of the issues with that causes gold for XP to struggle in that it doesn't fit as neatly into sort of fluid. We're playing now. We're doing some little bit of math now. We'll start playing again tomorrow, or we can do it right now. That sort of freewheeling idea that Gygax and his gaming friends did versus the more this is game night. We have 3 hours. Let's get stuff done mentality that's more common today. And that's, I think, one of the complications that makes Goal for XP harder to implement in a modern game. But maybe we should pivot from that to maybe speak about some of the great positives. I think we each have sort of picked out one of the big positives of what it does. Do you want to go first, or will I do mine?
Go on.
So for me, I think one of the major advantages, and you can argue this, of course, everyone argues this, but I think one of the big elements of Gold for XP is that it frames your character's progression as being dependent on exploration. By adding this element, this is not a game about speed running through a dungeon, trying to find the boss, killing the boss, leaving. It's not a game about spending 3 hours at a whim in town and messing around. It is a game where you're not going to get anywhere unless you are in a place of danger, seeking a material good, finding it, bringing it somewhere. It frames it all in terms of exploration. It doesn't necessarily mean like you're not looking for like little. You're not trying to read GM's mind to say, oh, does he want us to follow this plot hook or that plot hook, or does she want us to talk to this person or that person? Because Gold for XP is baked in, usually alongside a certain element of monster XP. It frames the process of advancing your characters is in go in, find something, and go through the process of getting it out or what have you. And now you can, if you're in older rule sets with much lower hit points and bigger penalties for being surrounded by orcs, you can go like try grinding for XP by attacking a orc camp or what have you. But maybe it'd be far better to just go find a treasure that's left open or like guarded by a trap, but you think you know how to beat the trap. It increases the options and it makes like trying to not just trying to find where treasure is, which can be both a fill in the map exercise, but also maybe a social exercise. So you befriend your goblins, and they say, "Oh, the orcs have a big chest of gold in a secret room X here and here and here," and that kind of stuff. It's not just that the direct dungeon mapping or social exploration you can call it, but also like indirect things. Like if you find a secret tunnel, some of things does that lead to the back end of the troll cave so that you can nip in, take the troll's treasure, and get out before they notice you. That's how things. It puts the emphasis on trying to find things, and that's a unique game experience. It really puts the dungeon crawl as a center and makes it you are trying to find your way through a space. You're trying to master this space, this dungeon. That's the route to success. It's a clearly defined route to success. Whereas a lot of old school gamers will say that modern games with their XP every session or XP every time you do whatever the GM's plot is, these seem very wishy-washy to them and disconnected from the activity.
I find interesting is like for like for a long time I didn't get gold for XP. I started towards the tail end of AD&D second edition where gold for XP wasn't really a thing. When I heard of the concept of gold for XP, I just found it baffling. As in, I just didn't get it. But I suppose since running into OSR the last couple of years, I suppose the logic of it's finally clicked with me, as in it does encourage, I suppose, approaches which aren't just find the monsters and slaughter the monsters, or there's also what's now called milestone leveling, but that often becomes a case of, are you just going on GM whim then? Are you going on player pestering? Because that can happen. As in, have we leveled up yet? Have we leveled up yet?
Yeah. Putting the onus onto GM and the GM's plan as opposed to making the players responsible for their own XP.
Yeah, which I think is a healthier dynamic.
Yeah, well, the GM is off the hook for making sure that this nice progression of vampire spawn to vampire to master vampire. The players could take a look at the situation, say, we're not ready for any kind of vampire, so let's go off to the troll dungeons and use that secret passageway and level up from that treasure first.
Or if there's actually a back passage into the Master Vampire's treasure vault. Yeah, let's rob him blind and not actually fight him.
Yeah, all these things. by putting the responsibility for advancement onto the players, it frees up the GM to focus on running the game and designing the world to suit what makes sense, as opposed to what plot the players need to daisy chain to the right level. And as you're saying, there's the advantages of it not necessarily to be as violent. And this is there's two sides to this, and we'll get back to the reverse side. But in theory, having gold for XP means that you don't need to fight as much, and you can just focus on searching for treasure people have forgotten, for example.
Nooks and crannies.
Yeah, nooks and crannies, but also on beating traps. Maybe you find like treasure chests that are surrounded by traps, and you, through intelligence or rogue skills or whatever have you, find a way through the traps and get big treasure payout that way, and you don't have to fight a single goblin. That's another aspect of it. Incentivizing not necessarily violent options, in combination with the fact that at least early on, older edition characters were quite fragile. You create this paradigm of only fight when you have to, otherwise just focus on getting the treasure, and maybe think about if you want to kill orcs for XP. Maybe think your plan first. Don't just rush in when you could just go 3 rooms over, solve a weird puzzle, answer the riddle of the Sphinx, and get just as much XP that way.
There's rewards for lateral thinking and thoroughness. Also planning, because particularly on depending on how you're getting the XP for gold. Because if you're getting the XP for gold for pulling it out of the dungeon in a campaign where, say, everything is about the dungeon and the not dungeon, like that's a lot easier than, right, how do we get this gold back over the 100 miles of wilderness infested with monsters and rough terrain? Because that's a very different prospect.
Yeah, yeah. So you can set the puzzle of XP gaining to whatever level suits you. It could be just as soon as you get out the door, you cash it in, or it has to be you have to get to town, or it has to be you have to get through the hex crawl to safety before, or as suggested earlier, it could be you only count it once you've spent it, and engage within the non-dungeon world in various ways. And
Yeah, or like bring the gold back to into civilization. Get it into the economy, that sort of thing. Yeah, like that's a lever that the GM can adjust.
I wanted to go over a few more of the positive aspects, and one of the big ones, and I saw a recent article about this, is that the treasure is diegetic. It is a thing that exists in the world. You find your treasure. It is a thing you have to interact with. A thing that people recognize as having value automatically, and therefore there's no what a we might consider weirdness, where why did we level up? Oh, it's because you got to the top of this mountain, you talked to this ancient sage, and you solved this riddle, and that was the transition point between level 7 and level 8. Oh, congratulations.
It's a bit abstract.
Yeah. Or if you're going for certain milestones, say, oh, we killed 1,000 trolls in this cave, or fought 2 dragons over here, but the actual boss that is letting us get to the next level is actually this mind flayer. And if you kill the mind flayer, you level up, but none of the other ones.
Hmm.
By making advancement connected to a real world, or not real world, but like a element of the game world that exists as tangible, well, it connects the player's actions to their own advancement more strongly, and it also sort of mirrors what's happening in the world, where people have got loads of treasure, so that they are now more important. It mirrors their on their character sheet, the numbers go up, so the two things match, as it were.
By and large, in just about any campaign world, having more wealth equates somewhat to having more power. Like, you afford better equipment, you've more influence, you've better training.
And yeah, that can branch out to all things. It encourages, particularly if you are going to be the type that says, "Oh, you have to spend the gold to get the XP." just having all this gold around is going to encourage people. The world's going to treat them differently. Some people are going to respect the more. If you've listened to Gygax and all of his wonderful advice in the DMG, you're going to have an awful lot of people suddenly inventing taxes or trying to swindle their characters because that was how he framed everything. See our previous episodes on the original DMG. Yeah, the idea was that because again, gold was this physical thing that existed in the world and had meaning. It connected what you did in the, let's say, the dungeon half of the game to what you did in the non-dungeon part of the game, and yeah, like one affected the other. It wasn't just this forgotten temple that no one can ever enter unless they're level 3, and it doesn't really matter to your day-to-day politics. All of a sudden, you're bringing this treasure out of it, and all of a sudden, you kick the mayor out because you bribed everyone and you won the election to be mayor, or the thief guilds, keep trying to steal from you, or foreign dignitaries. They go to you to try to influence things instead of king because you're wealthy and have spells and such. So maybe you can. It presents extra possibilities. Whereas if you're a more modern character who's just this itinerant problem solver running around, again, the GM's sort of obligated to throw plot hooks in your way as opposed to based on what you do, you'll just sort of have this kind of thing happen. Like the decision of where you store all your ill-gotten gains will suddenly become very relevant.
Yeah, you also get some weird problems, like say with fifth edition of D&D. A complaint I've heard from a number of people is there's nothing to spend gold on, and by default, that's true. Once you have your bits of equipment, maybe some plate armor if you're that way inclined, fightery wise. Yeah, like the game doesn't really have a framework by default for handling gold, so it's just kind of there, and the GM has to do more work into coming up with ways of, well, making it relevant, which seems like an unnecessary disconnect. When I mean, whatever about gold for XP, there should be uses for gold. Anyway, that's another topic, though.
I do think there are like sub options hidden in the Dungeon Master's Guide that really should be put into the player's handbook. It might pad out the equipment section a bit with stuff like what are we going to do with this? Oh well, when level 5, all of a sudden you'll want 13 boats, 50 harlings, and the rental price for a dock. So these kind of things can come up at certain points if you're depending on how you're engaging with the world. These are things that other games handle in different ways. And actually, I'm not certain that a lot of older games handle it as well as we might like. We say that earlier editions are how to do a better job of what do you spend the money on. And I think that's only true to a degree. It certainly, the DMG we read, see previous episodes, it certainly had flashed out things for building castles, certain hireling rules, but I don't think it had a lot of intermediate expenses, as we might call them. Sure, when you get to level 8, all of a sudden, you're able to. You should have enough XP, gold left over from your trading to design your castle like you're playing Minecraft all of a sudden. But what do you do between like level 2 when you get as I say, buy your plate armor? Like, are you meant to be spending it all on those exorbitant training costs and your hirelings?
Maybe.
And I think there are answers to that in the DMG. It takes a while to read, and I'm pretty sure the PHP would have a whole bunch of extra stuff. But I suspect a problem with a lot of them is that they don't seem like cool things to spend your money on so much as expenses for expenses' sake. A big one is the training cost rules that Gygax put into first edition, where that leveling up required XP, sometimes more XP than was actually required to get to the level. And of course, there was the rule that if you were at the XP for one level, you couldn't level past that, and you stopped gaining XP even if you kept gaining treasure. I imagine it's one of those rules a lot of people shot in the head very quickly for. Again, the disconnect between someone who a group that stops the session whenever they leave the dungeon, does some math, figures everything out, and then maybe goes back in for a second session in the night. Whereas everyone else, well, not everyone else, but a lot of people sort of want to have the block of time and the sort of liminal space, and messing around with math in the middle of a D&D session to calculate, well, like, do we need to spend 3 weeks or 4 weeks on training costs? But it's just the rogue who leveled up, and the wizard is not going to level up for another 3 dungeons. So questions that were easier to answer in sort of fluid space of the Gygaxian open table model, but were crippling in the strict 3 hours of the week for same 4 people every week games that other people were.
Yeah, well, different play styles may actually require some different solutions. Like,
Yeah. Other issues with grave robbing, I think we should probably go back to our two big things.
true.
I said that exploration was a big bonus for the whole Gold for XP paradigm. That has its dark mirror, which I would like to call scraping.
Ah, every nook and cranny.
Yeah. There's a great quote from a game designer where he's saying that given the opportunity, players will optimize the fun out of the game.
Oh yeah, that is a good one.
If you tell people that every gold coin that they pick up, or every 100 coppers, or every 10 silvers that they find, or 5 electrum pieces, was it? If you tell someone that the number of coins turns into XP for them, there will be a certain nagging feeling in the back of a lot of people's heads that they need to check every corner. They need to do search checks on every 5 foot square, mug every goblin they find, steal the shoes and the rusty swords from every orc to sell. It's one of those. It's one of those annoying things where it feels really rational to be doing these things, but actually, if you think of it in terms of XP gained per time spent in the session, is actually way less efficient than just looking for the big scores. It's one of those tricky ones where you kind of want you want to incentivize looking for big treasure, or being efficient with time, or otherwise finding big blobs of XP in the treasure. But there's always going to be this feeling, well, like every point counts, and because it's not entirely a rational feeling, it can create negative play experiences where people will quote unquote waste a session cutting open the stomachs of every monster and negotiating over, well, like, if we sell the rusty cobalt swords to the troll shaman, does that count as gaining XP because it's more treasure? Like this kind of carry on develops. So it's like, oh no, we got the money before we left the dungeon, so it's not commerce, it's treasure. And
Oh, that I suspect that's a table to by table conversation.
yeah, and we'll circle back to that. The other one, quick, of course, is your point that we encourage less violent solutions if we have treasure. That's sort of true in the vulnerable environment where players have few hit points. They can't necessarily, take on entire squads of guys.
But once they can, those monsters have treasure, right? All those monsters have treasure.
Yeah, where we get to a point where essentially you can accidentally incentivize people to start mugging the first level kobolds or the second level orcs, and just start pounding on them again for this idea of getting maximal value, where we get the monster XP and we get whatever pittance of treasure they have. This is a problem that was noted very early on, because I believe original D&D, the Chainmail supplement, had the rule where if you were a higher level person and you were fighting a lower level monster, you would sort of divide the experience you got based on the level of the monster. So if you were level 5, they were level 2, you only get 40% of your value.
Hmm.
But again, we're going to get back to that's math that GMs hate, particularly if the circumstances say that you have to do that math in the middle of your allotted time as opposed to between sessions.
Well, yeah, that's a bit of a sticking point. Having to do a whole pile of maths in the middle of a session is a bit of a different prospect.
Yeah. On the other side, on the player side, there's this people don't want to be bullies, but they might feel compelled to be bullies in order to, get their XP. If you haven't framed your XP system in particular ways to, incentivize what they want them to do, which is to go down to deeper dungeons and, fight bigger monsters, then again, that sort of, hoarding mentality comes back, and you're saying, well, we get a little bit extra, like Johnny the Mage is nearly at a level 5. We just fireball a couple of them and just to pad out our XP gains for the session. Again, it's one of those things where it's very it's feeling based. It's like it's not a rational action, but it feels like a rational action because it has a defined reward. But then there's still this disconnect. Well, I'm a heroic paladin, but we do get extra money for taking the poor box out of the Kuatoa cleric's house. And I guess finally we can do the big one, I think. Far apart from just, not wanting to be bullies, people don't want to be grave robbers where they go into, or even just thieves, murder thieves, where they just go into a place and just try stealing stuff from everyone. You really have to frame the situation as it is okay for you to be in this dungeon and taking all this treasure out of it, and that can be difficult to do if you've characterized all your kobolds, or maybe your players think that the orcs have a point.
I think that's very much a setting dependent variable. Like our orcs like just another sentient species, not very different, not all that different to humans. Our orcs literally pieces of a dark god brought to Earth. The answer to that will influence like how that pans out.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, that's sort of the framing that is required when you have the sort of goal for XP system that doesn't always like match up with how a GM wants to present their setting. Like if you are saying that the orcs have their own culture and genuine grievances against the town, that is why they stole from all those merchants, the players might agree with them, and then if the players agree with them and they don't take the orc's treasure and such, they're not going to get any XP under the system. So you can feel like they're being punished for engaging with the world, which is the opposite of what you want, right? We said you wanted to encourage them to engage with the world, but instead of engaging with the world, they have to engage with economics.
It may be a case that relying on a single metric for XP, isn't ideal.
That's maybe where we're coming to. Okay, we've been at this for a while. I think I want to sort of summarize where I think. Whereas, what I think is the issue and the reason why Gold for XP has dropped down to what we might call more niche applicability. I think the thing is that the all the pros, the good aspects of Gold for XP, are sort of aspirational and less abstract, but good in the general sense. Whereas all the cons, all the problems that Gold for XP have, are practical in nature.
Mm.
I think that's our issues where Gary Gygax, who loved math and had understanding players who were willing to go along with the premise and stab the odd goblin or random bandit for a nickel, he could design us all as want, but the person who had to put it into play had a very different gaming group with very different ideas about how money works, how mercenary work is supposed to go,
Different core assumptions in general.
different core substance, and maybe just didn't like the process of doing math every session to determine how often people look up, how to split up gold, like what do we spend the gold? Do we implement training costs, or is that too annoying? Is there something we can buy between buying the plate armor and buying the castle? All these are like things that the GM, with some support from depending on the system, but often very like just the load that was put onto the GM for results which might work out, but might not, depending on the group that GM has. I think these are the things that caused Gold for XP to go by the wayside.
Yeah, if advantages aren't obvious and disadvantages are obvious, then yeah, there's pressure to remove a system or abandon it.
Again, I don't want to like knock the entire concept, but I think the fact that it has found its place in a very specific niche is telling. Like that there are loads of people who really like Gold for XP and the type of gameplay that it creates, but they are relegated to the OSR space, which wide, diverse, and has a lot of different iterations of it and a lot of different ways, and solves the problem of practical application by encouraging players to try encouraging GMs to try a whole bunch of subsystems or ways of framing things, ways of calculating their goal for XP in all kinds of ways, and encourages house ruling to make it work for their group. But it thrives in that particular space and not as much in other places.
Yeah, I will say though, I like browsing around. I have seen a number of threads for adapting Gold for XP to even fifth edition D&D. So the concept is not uniquely limited to OSR fans.
Yeah, no, there are GMs for whom the issue is that they're trying to get that sort of exploration style or not automatically violent style of you're trying to find things, you're trying to master this dungeon, you're trying to find out all the secrets of this dungeon, and you're trying to tie those directly into how the players advance their characters. So again, absolutely this thing, but it is, I'd imagine the reason that there are a lot of threads about it is that it is something that requires work. You're gonna have to discuss your pros and cons and think exactly like how you want to incentivize different things. And the couple of paragraphs of rules back in first ed, while very interesting, I'm not necessarily thinking are going to solve all the problems that a given GM is going to have with the issue.
Oh, for sure. Well, they might, but nothing is certain in this world.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, we quite possibly revisit this topic again and maybe discuss why wishy-washy your systems work out well for the grand populace of the gaming world.
And if you, dear listener, have any ideas or vehement arguments about a preferred XP system or combination of XP systems, feel free to contact us through email or or join our Discord.
Mm-hmm. Link in the show notes. But for now, we have granted you large amounts of gold, so go do math on that gold and figure out whether your gaming is leveled up. But for now, this party's over. Thanks for listening to the Adventure Party. You can find show notes and links to things we've mentioned at www.theadventuringparty.net and on our Facebook page. You can leave comments there or talk to our Twitter account at AdventuringPTY. Or you can record a voice message at www.speakpipe.com/theadventuringparty. We can also be contacted directly by email at party@theadventuringparty.net. If you'd like to be in touch with the party all the time, come join our Discord server, link in the show notes. The Adventuring Party is released under Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share Alike version 3 license.